Apartments are not supposed to do this. They're not supposed to just disappear. But that's exactly what happened. I've been working crime scene investigations for almost 9 years now. It's mostly routine: suicides, overdoses, accidental deaths. It's not a job for the faint of heart, but you learn to disconnect. Yeah, it just happens. You follow protocols. You check the boxes. Then you go home and try not to think too much. At least that's how it used to be, until the night they sent me to that unit in South Chicago. We were called in after neighbors reported the smell, that thick metallic stench that clings to your nostrils. It was the kind of scent that sinks into the drywall, like old blood baking slowly behind paint and plaster. So the assumption was simple. It's just another cleanup, a long-abandoned apartment, most likely a suicide. But when I got there, I stopped cold. There was no door, not locked, not jammed. It was just gone. The entire doorway had been sealed from the inside, bricked over as if it had never existed. The number plate was still there on the wall, right where it should be, but the entry itself had vanished. The only way in was through the adjacent unit, where firefighters had knocked a hole through the shared wall. The opening was unfinished. Exposed studs, torn insulation, and a cold, quiet air that spilled out like the place had exhaled for the first time in years. I just crawled through. The moment my foot hit the floor on the other side, I felt it. Not air pressure, not temperature, but presence. Like something was watching. Like the silence itself was alive. The room was dark and still. That rusted iron scent hit harder now, stronger, more oppressive. It clung to my skin, settled in my teeth. And then I saw the mirrors. Every one of them, the bathroom mirror, closet doors, even a shattered vanity lying on the ground, was completely smeared with greasy fingerprints. Dozens of them, layered and clawed across the glass, like someone had been trying to grab their own reflection. And on every mirror, written again and again in thick black marker, were the same 6 words. It comes when I sleep. Over and over. On every surface. The message looked less like a warning and more like a confession, scratched out in desperation by someone who had run out of time. We found the body in the bedroom. A man, mid-30s. No external trauma, no drugs nearby, no weapons. There was blood on the sheets, soaked deep into the mattress, but none on him. No wounds, not even a scratch, just his face. It was twisted in a way I've never seen before, jaw wide, frozen mid-scream, eyes locked on the corner of the ceiling like he had seen something coming for him and couldn't look away. I documented everything, took the photos, and measured the scene. But the longer I stood in that room, the more the silence began to press in. Not peaceful silence, the other kind, the kind that feels intentional. And then I heard it. Breathing. Someone is breathing. It wasn't mine. It came from the far wall, the one that used to hold the doorway. It sounded like someone lying just on the other side, resting, but I was alone. And hours later, I reviewed the photos back at the lab. At first, everything looked the way I remembered. Then I got to frame 36, a wide shot of the hallway, just outside the bedroom. In the corner of the mirror, barely visible, was something else. A shape, not a shadow. A figure. It stood directly behind me, in the hallway I had just walked down, the hallway where no one else had been. I zoomed in and checked the timestamp. It was real. I was alone in that room. But in the photo, I was not. We pulled the building's records. That unit had been unoccupied for nearly 2 years. No keys issued, no utility accounts. The bricking over of the door had never been ordered. No permits, no maintenance logs, not even an explanation. And the mirrors? We logged and tagged them and sent them off with the evidence team, but they're gone now. Somewhere between collection and storage. They just vanished. No one knows where they ended up, or if they were ever actually moved at all. The unit has been sealed again, but some nights, when the hall lights flicker, the neighbors say they hear it, breathing, just beyond the wall, like someone waiting for the next person to crawl through. The smell hit us before we even stepped inside. It was so thick and sweet in the worst way possible. The kind of odor that sticks to your teeth and clings to your clothes long after you've left. Yeah, that kind. We thought it was just a typical case. Textbook decomposition inside an abandoned property. A middle-aged male, found curled in the corner of a sun-baked home with no air conditioning, sealed tight against the humid Louisiana summer. His skin had turned the shade of wrought green. His belly was bloated, and black fluid had pooled around his mouth. Flies swarmed in clouds near the windows, and the walls shimmered with heat and decay. Everything about it matched the script we'd seen a dozen times before. We suited up and got to work. My partner Jose cracked a few dark jokes to keep the nausea at bay, while I began my measurements and photographic documentation. The whole thing was unpleasant, but it's routine until I noticed his eyes. They were not dry. They were not clouded by death like they should have been. Instead, they looked focused, like locked onto something. I couldn't explain it, but they felt alert and alive. Out of instinct and curiosity, I leaned in closer to get a better look. And that's when it blinked. I dropped the camera and stumbled backward, screaming before I even understood what I had seen. The corpse? No. The man let out a gasp, a low, crackling sound like death played in reverse. Everyone around me froze. The paramedics pushed him to life and rushed over. His pulse was barely there. His temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, and his breathing was almost undetectable. For a moment, we thought we had lost him again, but the team managed to stabilize him just long enough to run preliminary tests. The results left all of us speechless. It was tetrodotoxin, an extremely rare and deadly neurotoxin often found in certain pufferfish. In small doses, it paralyzes the entire body, slows the heart rate to nearly zero, and can render a person completely immobile while leaving their brain fully conscious. He had been alive, aware, for 3 days. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He couldn't even blink fast enough to draw attention. He just laid there in silence, paralyzed and slowly dehydrating, while the world moved around him. Rats had come and gone. Flies had landed on his skin, and none of us realized the truth until he blinked. We were seconds away from zipping him into a body bag while he was still alive. I still cannot forget the look in his eyes. He never fully woke up again. His body survived, but the damage had already been done. Prolonged oxygen deprivation and dehydration had shattered his brain function. Doctors called it extreme conscious trauma, like being trapped inside your own death. His vitals remained, but the person inside was gone. The investigation never uncovered who gave him the toxin or why. Some speculated it was self-inflicted, some suggested it was a botched attempt at faking death, and others whispered darker theories, even punishments, tortures, experimentations. But none of those answers ever came. He was transferred to long-term care a few weeks later, still breathing through machines, still blinking occasionally, but completely unresponsive. There was nothing behind his stare anymore. No recognition, no fear, no pain. Just an empty vessel of a man who had witnessed something no one should ever endure. The case was eventually closed. Another strange file buried in the system. But for me, something changed. Now every time I walk into a death scene, I hesitate. I stop. I check the eyes. I wait to see if they're truly gone. Because what if someone else is still in there? What if they're trapped, screaming in silence, just waiting for someone to notice? And what if next time, we don't? If your skin started crawling while hearing this story, you're not imagining it. Trust that feeling, because sometimes stories like this don't end when the screen goes dark. So before your lights flicker, before your reflection in the mirror holds still just a second too long, take a moment to like, comment, and share this. That way, you won't be the only one who knows. And whatever you do, subscribe before midnight. Because the ones who survive being mistaken for dead, they're still out there. And some of them never really wake up. The cabin was about as remote as you could get. A one-room hunting shack tucked deep into the trees, miles from the nearest paved road. The kind of place you drive past without knowing it's there. The kind of place that doesn't get visitors. Not anymore. I was called in by the local sheriff's department to assist with what they thought might be a cold case. The new owner had been doing light renovations when he noticed something strange beneath the floorboards. Some dark stains. It was not fresh, not recent, but clearly blood. The structure had been abandoned for decades, at least according to the deed. The locals called it a ghost shack. The interesting thing is, even hunters avoided it. Kids dared each other to spend the night there, but no one ever did. First, we brought in luminol to check for traces, and the moment we sprayed the floor, the entire room lit up. A bright fluorescent blue covered almost everything. It was not scattered, it was not splitted. The pattern was concentrated. The boards had soaked up blood, a lot of it, but only beneath the surface. On top, the planks looked perfectly clean. No visible trails, no disturbance. And that meant just one thing. Whatever had happened was not above the floor. It was below it. We started removing boards one by one, careful not to damage anything. And it didn't take long to find it. There, beneath the third row of planks, wedged between the joints, was a shoebox, wrapped tightly in black trash bags. The entire thing was sealed with duct tape, like someone had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden and untouched. I opened it, and that's when I saw it. And even now, I can still see it, clear as day, burned into the back of my eyes. Inside the box was a small, dried-out body of a newborn baby. It was wrapped in a yellowed newspaper dated July 1972. The paper had faded to an almost gold hue, brittle to the touch, but the infant inside was eerily intact. There were small bite marks on the edges of the blanket, tiny, rodent-like impressions from mice or rats over the years. But the baby itself had no marks, no signs of decay. It was perfectly preserved, almost protected. Next to the infant was a woman's wedding ring, worn, the kind that hadn't been polished in decades. And on the inside was a name etched into the gold band, faded but still legible. Catherine. We traced it. The name belonged to a woman living just 20 minutes outside of town, 78 years old, still alive, still in the same home she had moved into shortly after her wedding, the same year as the date on the newspaper. We brought her in for questioning. She seemed calm, tired, almost bored. When we showed her the ring and asked about the baby, she shook her head slowly and said, "I never had any children." All of us were shocked. We ran the DNA at the moment itself, and the results came back conclusive. That newborn had been her biological child. We prepared to bring her back in, but when the deputies returned to her property the next morning, she was gone. The house was spotless. The curtains were drawn. The fridge was empty. And taped to the front door, written in uneven, rushed handwriting, was a note. "You found what I buried, but you didn't hear it cry." We searched for weeks, through records, trails, even nearby counties, but it was like she vanished. And every now and then, I think about that shoebox, that cabin, the way the blood had soaked beneath the floor but left no trace on top. I think about the baby, how untouched it was, how preserved. And I wonder how long it had been crying, alone, under the floor, with no one there to answer. It was the kind of call that makes the radio go quiet. Yes, a triple homicide. It was a cold January night, a second-story apartment. The blood was reported visible from the street, and when we arrived, the scene was in total chaos. Blood spatter across the walls, furniture overturned. There were clear signs of a struggle in every room. One of the victims, a male, early 30s, was found half hanging out of a broken window. His body twisted in a way that didn't look possible without force. The other two were inside. One in the hallway, one slumped behind the kitchen island. But it was not the violence that stopped me cold. It was the footprints. They started near the first victim's body. Bare feet, no shoes, no socks, just deep, human-looking prints. But they didn't match any of the victims. It was too large. The prints moved across the room, tracked calmly down the hallway, each one slightly offset like someone walking slowly, purposefully. And then they stopped, just in front of a wall. There was no door, no closet, no window. Nothing. Just solid drywall. There were no signs of any passage, no scratches or indentations. But that's where the prints ended, mid-stride. So I just knelt down and checked the floor. The prints were wet, like visibly wet. But the floor around them was bone dry. There was no source of water, no spilled blood nearby. No leaking pipes. Nothing overhead. It was like something had stepped into warm blood and appeared there, then vanished. I took pictures, dozens of them in every single angle. Also close-up shots of the final footprint, just inches from the wall. Well, we didn't have answers, but we had evidence. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't until later, when I was developing the film, that I saw it. Frame 19. The photo of the last footprint. In the upper corner, almost out of focus, was something else. A face, distorted, pale. Mouth stretched wide like it was screaming. But it was upside down, like it was hanging from the ceiling or crawling across it. I stared at it for a long time, convincing myself it was a trick of the shadows. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. The features were not even blurred, like someone had caught the moment between movement and madness. There were no cameras in the apartment, no security footage, nothing to back up what I saw. Just the photo. I printed a copy and logged it into evidence. But the original, the one I took myself, I kept. I don't know why. I keep it locked in a box in my attic, buried under old case files and things I pretend don't bother me. But sometimes, on the worst nights, the ones where the silence in the house feels too heavy, I hear it. Scratching. Faint, but constant. Coming from inside that box. And every time I check, the photo, it's still there. Untouched. Unchanged. Except, the last time I looked, that upside-down face, it was not in the corner anymore.